Some, and the weather is good for some of them and horrible for the others.
So let me read over as you are passing out handouts and pencils or pens or whatever. Let me read over this section. Be patient, therefore, beloved, until the coming of the Lord. The farmer waits for the precious crop from the earth, being patient with it until it receives the early and the late rains. You also must be patient. Strengthen your hearts, for the coming of the Lord is near. Beloved, do not grumble against one another, so that you may not be judged. See, the judge is standing at the doors. As an example of suffering and patience, beloved, take the prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord. Indeed, we call blessed those who showed endurance. You have heard of the endurance of Job, and you have seen the purpose of the Lord, how the Lord is compassionate and merciful. Above all, my beloved, do not swear either by heaven or by earth or by another oath. Let your yes be yes and your no be no, so that you may not fall under condemnation. So James is talking about patience, using the word 4 times in 4 verses. According to verse 7, what did people need to be patient about? What is he calling them to be patient about?
Waiting for the second coming.
Yeah, waiting for the Lord. Now think, part of it is we're talking about a generation. Remember, who's writing this? Who is James? The brother of Jesus. And these people who have been believers for a little while, they see the resurrection of Jesus, they see his ascension, some of them, and they are waiting for Jesus to come back. Their thought is, it's going to be any minute now. And then several years go by, and we're now talking about these people who are saying, anytime now, come on, right? For it's coming.
Imagine them being badgered by the people who are saying to them, say we told you.
Right. That's another element.
Happen.
Yeah.
I don't know why you were foolish enough to believe it.
Why are you wasting your time? He hasn't come yet. Why should you keep waiting? And we, 2,000 years later, thereabouts, we're still waiting, right? And so that counter argument of why are you waiting, you're wasting your time, is maybe even more strong. Been 2,000 years, why are you still waiting? And yet for us, it's been 2,000 years, so maybe that expectation as well has gone away. We're not waiting for Jesus' coming. What analogy does James use in verse 7?
Farmer grow.
Farmer. Whose crop?
Precious fruit of the earth.
Yeah. Think of all the things that a farmer has to wait for. And especially, think of all the things that a farmer has to wait for when he can't just hook up a hose, right? He's waiting for the rains to come. He's waiting for the plants to grow. He's waiting for the harvest. He's waiting for all of these different things. And he has to know that there's a certain time when things, a seed takes a certain amount of time for it to germinate and grow and get to the point where you are able to harvest it. And even sometimes when you see the fruit there, you still have to wait for it to be ripe, and then you can take it, right? So there's a lot of patience. So that's a good analogy. Have you ever planted a vegetable garden? How long does it seem to take from when you first plant the seeds to when you get to bring in the first ripe vegetable and cook it up, or in Dave's case, just eat it?
It takes forever.
Yeah, it
I
does.
go out and plant stuff, and then I walk out to the garden every morning to see who's doing it.
Right.
It takes weeks, it takes a long time.
It takes yeah. I planted seeds
Yeah.
probably, 4 weeks ago now. Now I'm just getting little things, right?
But you're getting it.
Yeah.
You didn't freeze?
No, well, it was all cold crops, so
Oh.
it was all right. But yeah, you check every day. Is it big enough to eat? No, it's not big enough to eat, right? It takes a while for it to happen.
Then it all comes in the same time.
Right, yeah.
Like tomatoes.
That's the opposite of patience. How does this experience compare to waiting for Jesus' return?
Patience.
Yeah, still need patience. And think of some of the same lessons, right? A plant it's gonna take as long as it's gonna take for a plant to get to that place where you can.
But it yields a good,
It does. Ooh, that's a good one. 5 points to
Yeah.
yours. Try it.
I need all the points I can.
Yeah. Good fruits. It's gonna take as long as it's gonna take. There's gonna be some challenges along the way, but that's just how it's supposed to be, right? That's the
Well, it's
process.
gonna take a limited time. I mean, in my case, it may take 15 years, but it's gonna happen one way or the other.
Right, it's gonna happen one way or another. Whether we do anything or worry about it or anything like that, right? It's gonna happen. It's gonna happen in God's timing and not our timing. Our kind of worrying about it and fretting about it is not gonna make it happen faster. Yeah. James says in verse 11, that those who persevere, through the suffering are blessed. What does he mean by that?
It means that they receive God's favor.
Who is they that we're talking about? In verse 9, yeah, the blessed are the prophets, right? We call them blessed, right? Why are they blessed? I've read some of the prophets. Well, I've read all of them, but you know, I've read about their lives. They were not great, and yet we call them blessed. Why?
Even though they suffered, they didn't give up.
They endured to the end, and that is why they're called blessed. Right? Jumping back, because it skips over all this. I don't know why they skipped it in this little lesson, but what does verse 9 say about how we act with one another through this suffering?
Rumble.
Yeah. And are we supposed to do that or not supposed to? No. That's a challenging one sometimes, right? Because right, no, it couldn't be.
It's everybody but you.
Right.
All those people, look at those other people over there. Front.
Yeah. Right, because it's what we do. When we face a challenge, we grumble about it. With my middle schoolers, I'm going through, Exodus, out into the wilderness. That's all it is. Oh, something bad happens. Grumble, 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 grumble. Moses, why'd you lead us out into the wilderness? So we could die? Weren't there enough graves back in Egypt where we could die there? But we do the same thing.
Talk to us about these middle schoolers. What are you doing? Teaching them
Oh.
Bible?
Yeah, I'm a Christian Learning Center. I'm teaching a Bible class. Yeah.
Great. I didn't know that either.
Yeah. There you go.
You
Oh, I
went
know
back
some
in
people
the
have done it, but I haven't.
Callie's class or grade last year, weren't you?
A couple of years ago, yeah, that was a different thing. I meant
Oh, okay.
But this, I'm teaching a class on Bible. So there
How
you
long
go.
you been doing that?
Since November.
Oh, okay.
How many come?
I've got a class of about 13, and then a class of about 27
Wow.
7th graders.
That's where you come.
That's fantastic.
Those are a lot of questions.
Lots of questions. Yeah. Sometimes they're on, but most of the time they're not. All right. Anyways, so
Like us.
a little bit. We all are tame. Very tame. We grumble in our suffering sometimes, don't we? Right. and we not only grumble, but how do we treat each other when we're suffering?
Not very nice.
Right. Right. Something bad's going on in your life at work or whatever it is. You come home and you kick the dog, right? Maybe not the dog. Maybe the husband. Maybe the wife, right? You know? Because we're upset about these things. I think this is what he's talking about. He also mentions there's the prophets who long suffering, right? Who else does he mention specifically by name? Job.
Patience.
Let's think through that a little bit. I don't know when the last time you read through the book of Job was, but you may remember that the overall arc is kind of an interesting thing. It's almost a morality play, right? So it starts off with the Satan, the accuser, coming before God and saying, "Hey, this guy Job, we need to. He only praises you because you protect him." God says, "Fine, I'll take away that protection. He'll still praise me," right? So the accuser goes and takes away everything that Job has, basically. And so the opening ends with him, he's sitting in sackcloth and ashes, and his wife is saying, "Just curse God and he'll strike you down, and then you don't have to worry about this anymore. Why do you keep suffering?" And then his 3 friends come. And his friends all are trying in various ways to kind of deal with the fact that they deal with the assumption that God is just, or God is supposed to be just at least. So if this stuff is happening to you, there's got to be some reason. So one says, well, it must be something that you did, right? There's some secret sin that you don't know about. And Job says, "No, I'm fine. Everything's good." And those sorts of things. Well, it must be that God is kind of like capricious, and there's some, maybe God isn't actually just. Those sorts of things. They play around with this philosophical things. Well, in the end, there's a 4th friend that comes in and suggests some other things, and we get a little bit closer. But then finally, there's one more person who comes and speaks with Job. Anybody know who that is? He speaks from a whirlwind. God. God himself comes down to Job. And this is after Job basically has a temper tantrum about, no, sure, God is just, that's fine, but I have done nothing to deserve this. God must be, I don't know what God's doing. I don't know what he's up to, but I did not earn this. So God comes down and he says, who's trying to speak out of turn? Who's speaking without wisdom? And then he goes on this long tirade about, where were you when the foundations of the world were being created? Where are you when a mountain goat gives birth on the side of a hill? Where are you when flowers open and all these sorts of things? And basically, what God says is, the scale, Job, just so you know, is huge. No idea what I'm doing. So let's not question the God of the universe because your life isn't going the way that you thought it should, basically. That's obviously a great paraphrase. But I think there's a good reason that James brings up Job, because his readers probably would be familiar with this story. And the end is basically, it does not give an answer. This is why bad things happen to good people. The answer is God's plans are so much more complex than we can possibly imagine. And he is doing so much more than we know, right? So why would James be bringing that up? Why would James specifically invoke the story of Job?
Because Job suffered, but he never gave up on God.
Because Job suffered and never gave up. Yeah. And that there was truly a purpose behind it. And that's, I think, the point of Job is that there is purpose behind things that happen, which can be helpful. Which brings to mind James 1, 2 through 4. Go back to the beginning. What does that say? Can someone read it?
Count it all joy, my brethren. Is that the one?
Uh-huh.
When you meet various trials, for you know that the testing of your faith produces steadfastness. And let steadfastness have its full effect, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing.
So reminded back to the beginning, what does James say there? Sum it up for me. How should we consider our struggles?
Joyfully.
Joyfully. Why?
You will lack in nothing.
God is trying us. It's a test.
A test and
Not quite. But he's trying us with difficulties to check our patience, to check our faith.
right.
Because your difficulties strengthen you.
Right. Your difficulties strengthen you. It's maybe less testing and more training. Right? Or the image that he uses there at the beginning, remember, is that silversmith refining silver. Remember that? As it goes through this heating process, he pulls away all of the impurities, gets rid of them, and then he heats it up again and again and again. And how does he know that he's done with the smithing process, purification process, the refining? That's it.
And there's no more of that stuff coming to the surface.
But how does he know that? So the silversmith sees his own reflection in the silver, because it's so pure. There's none of those impurities in it. So I think what James is saying here, remember, count it all as joy when you suffer. Now, continue to be patient, endure, wait with expectation for the coming of Jesus, but keep going through. Yeah, keep going.
Because God is working on you, and he's waiting for the moment when he can see a little bit of himself in you.
Exactly. He's got a purpose. I think that's why he brings up James. I think that's why he brings up the prophets, because these are people who we saw were refined by fire. They went through a whole lot of just not nice stuff, and yet we call them blessed. Have you ever heard of suffering referred to as the human condition? What does that mean?
Everybody will.
Right. Everybody suffers. It's part of the human condition. Think about that. What does that mean? that it's part of the human condition. Why are we, as a human race, why do we suffer? Why is that so part of our being that we just say it's always because we're sinful, right? Yeah. Original sin.
Because he suffered for us.
And he suffered for us. Okay.
Because we're dying. At the moment we're born, we're headed toward death.
Okay. Yeah, sin and death have full reign. But I think it's also because through that suffering, that's how we become refined. That's how we are able to reflect God's image. Remember what Francis Chan said? I think this is the first one, right? God's goal for us is not to be happy, it's to be what? Anybody remember? It's another H word. Holy. God's goal for us is not necessarily be happy. We will be happy. We are happy in this life, but that's not God's ultimate goal for us. What God's ultimate goal for us is to be holy, to be set apart, to be his people, to be his body, to be his hands and his feet. That's what we're supposed to be. And when we go through suffering and we go through challenges, every time we go through a challenge, we face an opportunity to choose God, to choose to reflect his glory, to learn, to grow. The Chinese symbol for challenge, I think it's challenge, is a combination of the symbol for danger and opportunity. Yeah. Is it true? Is suffering part of what it means to be human? Yeah, it is. And I think there's a purpose. There's a reason for it. What came to mind is going a totally different way, but I read a fascinating article about a book that, it's on the list of books that I might read someday if I have the time. But this gentleman's, the idea was looking at the way that our planet works and how much is in that. So the one thing that they noted was we have a planet where there are tectonic plates, right? There's a molten core, and then there are these plates on top of that. And they float around. And what does that floating around cause every once in a while? Earthquakes. Volcanoes. Disasters. These are terrible things, right? These are horrible, these events that kill sometimes thousands of people, right? Do you realize that if our planet was not created in this way, where plates that move around on top of a molten core, life as we know it could not exist on this planet? Our planet's also off its axis, right? That's why we have seasons. It's also why we have hurricanes. But again, if it wasn't that way, it could not exist on this planet. There are these things that are just looking at it cosmologically. That's not even cosmologically. Well, I don't know. Geologically. Right. Yeah. It's a different thing. Looking at like our planet geologically. Yeah. Geologically. Anyways, geographically too, there's some of that, but geologically, just looking at how our planet is put together, there are these things that we go, oh, earthquakes, hurricanes, tornadoes, these things are bad. And yet, if they didn't exist, we wouldn't exist. right? We face personal storms and earthquakes and troubles. And I think to a certain extent, if that wasn't part of the human condition, we were all just sort of, well, we'd just be all kind of happy and fat and happy, right? Because we wouldn't face any challenges ever. You know, I think to speculative fiction, the Time Machine. So H.G. Wells, the guy creates a time machine, goes into the far future, right? And he meets, not the Morla, but I don't remember what the people are. Anyway, and their entire life is just this beautiful, just like everything is provided for them. And you know what? They're dumb as rocks, right? And they have no will to live. And it actually turns out that they're basically cattle for the other sort of strain of humanity that has gone underground. If we didn't have any challenges, if we didn't have to overcome things, if we didn't have any suffering, we wouldn't have any need to overcome. We wouldn't have any need to trust God, right? So thank God that we go through thank God that this is the human condition. Count it as joy, right? What other types of suffering have you seen or even experienced?
How much time do they have?
And sometimes there is great suffering. Sometimes maybe some of us have actually experienced suffering. And it's a lot harder to say, count it all as joy when we experience true suffering. But maybe we can. At the same time, we watched that kind of documentary thing about the Christians in Syria that are being oppressed. And they were going through outrageous sufferings, and yet what is their response? It's joy. It's grace. It's steadfastness. It's amazing. Their faith is beyond what we see usually, right?
And that happened, I wasn't aware that it was exactly the same place 100 years ago in Syria with the Armenians.
Mm-hmm.
It's exactly
The Armenians,
exactly. It was like 1960, something like that.
Mm.
And
Wow.
yes,
I didn't realize
and I
it was
wasn't aware that the main city, Aleppo,
Wow.
same city that's experiencing exactly 100 years later, this exact same sort of thing. That population is being beat down, killed, run out of the country.
Turkey to do that.
Huh?
Turkey to do that.
Wow. Well, and
Yeah, I forgot it's there was a group, I forgot the name, but yeah, it worked, church.
Right.
Same thing, exactly 100 years
Wow.
ago.
All right, so, and let's finish up where this section finishes up is this swearing. And by swearing, it doesn't mean using bad language necessarily, but an oath, right? I swear to God. Well, how does that work into all of this, do you think?
He says it shows our impatience.
Right. It shows our impatience. So if we say, I swear to God, whatever it is, right? We're calling down God's wrath, potentially. And we're basically saying, God, come and fix this solution. Again, that's another element of when God comes down and speaks to Job. The other, it's several chapters that God speaks, there's a bit that's pretty funny where he basically says, "You really want me to do things like you all think, where I punish all those who do wrong? Do you really want that? Really? Let's think about that. You're very lucky that I don't do that all the time." And yet when we're swearing, when we're calling out. Now, this is not culturally, we don't do this as much as the Hebrew people. But this swearing of oaths and that sort of thing was a lot more for them.
Have y'all seen the commercial? That's a Cadillac commercial.
That's what I was just getting ready to say.
Okay.
Have you seen it?
They was down on a lot during the basketball
Uh-huh.
thing.
And it calls on God. I don't
But
remember
in the
exactly
middle of
why.
that, I was gonna say, I'm still wanting to call Billy Kunz and say, GM shouldn't be doing. They showed a big fancy Cadillacs coming down the road, and they're talking about the experience of it, and it says, "For God's sake, do that." Blah, blah,
Yeah,
blah, blah.
it does.
Right in the middle of
Pay
that.
attention to that
I'm
Cadillac
thinking,
commercial.
whoa.
And tell me what you remember from it when we meet again.
Wow.
No one really shows much in the pictures.
No, that's the Chevrolet commercial.
No, that's,
The Cadillac commercial
it's a new, big,
Cause
fancy.
every time it comes on, I say, whoa, why
Wow.
are they putting God in?
Right. For
They're
God's
running
sake.
about the same end, so I bet tomorrow and Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, I bet they'll run that
We'll do it
ad.
again.
Huh.
We'll see it again.
We've either been watching too much basketball or, but
Probably
they keep running it. And
Right.
I keep saying, I'm gonna call.
Yeah.
And complain.
You should.
Call you GM district guy and say,
Yeah.
you know,
Why
why
is God
is
in your
GM
commercial
putting that kind of
like
ad on?
this?
It says, whatever it's like, an enjoyment, a thrill or something, and for God's sake,
Right,
something,
these
I'm going.
things, yeah.
It doesn't belong in a cattle
Oof.
car. It
Well, and that
doesn't belong in an ad.
again, this is not in the thing, but at the end of the video, he talks a little bit about, the world that we live in is not the world that many of us grew up in.
That's true.
And so
So true.
this patience is really important as we live in a culture that doesn't bat an eye to, for God's sake, buy a car.
Yeah, yeah.
Wow, right? Just the arrogance and the callousness of our culture is staggering sometimes, right? And we encounter people who are not open to our faith and are mocking it. The persecution that we face, especially right now, is not even close to some things other people face. But there is persecution. And in some ways, I think that's good. I've shared with you the international students at Princeton who came in for their MDiv one year degree. And their number one prayer for the American church is that we might experience a little bit of suffering and a little bit of persecution, because in our faith, we just don't have to, for the most part, we don't have to really work for it. And they see in the African church, in the Syrian church, in South American church, all this joy and this faith and this outpouring of spiritual gifts, and they come to America and that's not what they see, because we don't have to depend on God. We talked last week about all of the many things that we have, and the resources we have access to. I mean, the poorest of the poor in our country, people who don't have homes, still have access to far more than even the more rich people in other countries. It's stunning, right? Whatever we face, it is an opportunity to have faith, to lean on God. So I encourage us all to do so. let me end with the live it out stuff. Have a little bit more time. Gut level prayer. Sometimes when you're suffering, praying can be difficult, especially if you're trying to mind your manners with God and pray correctly. Remember that prayer is open and honest communication with God. Take Job's example and let God know just how miserable you are, just how angry, sad, scared, or confused you may be. Tell him exactly how you feel. You aren't fooling him by trying to keep a secret from him. I might hold up David as an example. Read Psalm 13. You forget me, oh God, forever? How long will you turn your face from me? How long will you let me do it? Yeah, I can't remember what the next part is, but it's just be honest with God. He's big enough for it. Listening. Find out someone else's story. People become resilient through perseverance. When someone is going through a terrible time or suffering, it may seem like it's never going to end and hopelessness takes over. Even Job asked God to crush him and cut off his life so that his pain and misery would end. But Job persevered, and so have many people. Go to someone in your family, someone in your church, or someone else you know who has come through suffering and ask to hear that person's story, especially if you're going through something new. Sit with the suffering. It's good to pray for those who are suffering, and you should pray for them, but sometimes they need someone just to be there with them, to comfort them and to let them talk and hold their hand. You don't have to have answers, especially to the questions, why is this happening? You can say, I don't know, but I'm here for you. Right? Dave and I have talked a lot about sometimes a lot of the work that we do at Food Bank is just listening to people. I mean, we give them food, yeah, great, wonderful.
Ministry of
But we listen,
presence.
yeah.
Very common.
Yep. Ministry, yeah, absolutely. Research and support. In various parts of the world, Christians are suffering for their faith. Research their struggles, pray for them. Connect with an organization that helps them. Maybe. Or I'm sure there's all sorts of ways that you have felt you need to go forward with this. Let's pray. Lord God, thank you for the suffering that you put us through. Help us be thankful for the suffering you put us through. Thank you that you are in the process of refining us, of making us holy. Be with us in the suffering. Give us patience, Lord. Help us be like those prophets who stayed firm to the end. Help us learn, like Job, that you are God and you've got way bigger plans than we do. We thank you and we praise you that you have created us to suffer, to learn, to grow, to be transformed by your image, to become by degree more and more like you, like Jesus Christ. It is through him that we pray. Amen.
I will.